Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here. This is the City of Sisters Planning Commission workshop for Thursday, September 5th, 2024 at 4 p.m. I now call this meeting to order. First item of business is determination of a quorum. We have 5 commissioners present, therefore we do indeed have a quorum. Next item is adoption of the agenda. Do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda for the afternoon?
So moved.
In a second?
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Visitor communication. This is the time provided for individuals wishing to address the Planning Commission regarding issues not already on the agenda. Looks like we don't have anybody in the gallery this afternoon, so we'll go ahead and proceed to the workshop, and I'll turn it over to staff.
Perfect, thank you. For the record, my name's Jacob Smith. I do code enforcement out of the Community Development Department. What I have for you tonight is some draft language dealing with the unauthorized removal of significant trees on a developing lot. To start off, the definition in our code regarding significant trees is one that has a diameter of 8 inches, measured from the ground up 4.5 feet. We were directed by staff here earlier this year to reevaluate this penalty. There was an incident with a developer where a significant tree was removed. They were levied the $500 fine, and now we're here to discuss that $500 fine. So currently in 3.2500. It has a basic fine of $500, and by basic, I mean it's just a straight $500 fine. Pretty common for code enforcement. The problem is most of the time code enforcement is dealing with ongoing issues, so we can compound fines daily. When we're dealing with tree removal, that's not an option. So looking for alternatives to that, I took a look at about 10 other cities here in the state of Oregon and what they were doing for their tree removal code. I drafted up 3 different options that I thought were went throughout the range of what other municipalities were doing. On May 13th of this year, I took that language to the Urban Forestry Board. And again, I had the 3 options. And those 3 options were, we started with pushing up the fine from $500 to $2,000. It gave us a little range in between. We could, depending on why the tree was moved, we could go for the upper end of that. Option 2 was to split the trees into 2 different sizes, starting with the 8-inch up to a 20-inch, which would occur a $2,000 fine. And then anything above that, a $4,000 fine. And the third option in this draft language was a $300 per DBH of the tree that was removed. The Urban Forestry Board supported the $300 per DBH draft language, but they also were interested in adding more to that potentially. The city forester, Dan Galecki, he's stated that we could use the value of the tree in addition to the DBH. And the Urban Forestry Board supported him in that idea. So I took that information, I drafted up code language along the lines of the DBH and the value of the tree. I went back on July 8th to the Forestry Board, Urban Forestry Board, discussed the new code, and it's going to be the same code that is on attachment A. Again, dealing with the penalty being $300 per DBH of the tree, with an additional option to do the value of the tree.
You might explain what DBH is to everybody.
Oh, did I skip over that? I apologize. The DBH is determined by, again, the 3.5 or 4.5 feet up the diameter of the tree at that height. Right.
Right. We have a, I knew that, but I didn't think everybody else knew that.
So the board recommended that that draft be supported, and that was passed unanimously. So we are here now in front of the planning commission to discuss the proposed language as shown on attachment A.
So is it either or both?
It's written up to where it would be both. With my background in enforcement, I think we could utilize one or the other. That would have to be a discussion with the attorney, but I think it could be one or the other, but it is written up, or it could be compounded.
Because DBH, if you had a 20-inch tree, that's gonna be, what, about $6,000? So, yeah, it'll be significant. It'll keep people from just deciding that, well, it's cheaper to just cut the tree down and go for it.
Yeah, that would be a thing. I mean, as a business person, you would make that decision.
Right. Say $500. Oh, but I can make the house
Yeah,
bigger, you know?
absolutely. I mean,
Does the code currently specify, or this rewording of the code specify who is responsible for that fine? Is it the property owner, or if a contractor?
The vast majority, and in this case, we always can do the property owner. I would have to check on specific wording for contractors, but that's not normal. It almost always goes to the property owner.
Even if the contractor is the one that, so it's the dispute is then between the owner and the.
Correct, yeah.
I'd like to find a way to defend the homeowner in that instance, but I hate to it might get messy between a contractor and a homeowner.
Well, yeah, that's between.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
Still, if
yeah,
contractor cuts down a tree.
Yeah.
the Owner's, it's unknown.
yeah.
My only comment is that 8 inches is awfully small to call it a significant tree. I mean, that's a weed.
Okay,
I actually was gonna bring a tape measure.
Yeah, I mean, 8
Show
inches, is
everybody.
like,
8 inches.
yeah,
It's a small trout.
yeah.
We had that discussion with the amendment, the code amendment to, we did a previous code amendment that the planning commission was involved with because it was a municipal code amendment. And the discussion that came up about the size of the significant tree size in our code as well. And there was some discussion about changing it, but ultimately decided to keep it where it was.
and that was mainly due to, we have a private significant tree that we just passed here, not semi-recently. And if, it doesn't really matter what the number is, but they should be the same, or else we could have trees that were allowed to be cut down here and not here. And so
Yeah.
we're trying to avoid that situation.
I mean, logically, I would think 12-inch would be more, 12 or 14-inch would be more reasonable. 8-inch could be like just saplings, you know, basically.
Is there any way to like impose some like gross negligence? Like when it's just ridiculous, like multiple trees in a spot that's really gonna be an eyesore? I mean, you really made a mistake bad. I mean, is there any way to impose some sort of,
I think,
that could happen fast.
right. I think the number 2, the supplemental replacement fine is
Yeah.
that.
And I
is
mean,
that option.
traditionally, the value of the tree was triple stumpage. I mean, that was like a fine, like if loggers cut down extra trees, they had to pay triple the stumpage for the value. But I don't know if that's even a thing anymore.
Triple stumpage isn't very much for
Yeah,
pine,
it's
for
not very
pine
much
tree, it's
anymore. Yeah,
nothing.
it's like, yeah, I
Yeah.
think that time has passed.
300 per DBH is a lot.
Yeah.
It's different pine.
But at the value of the tree, if you're gonna.
Right.
Additionally, if you're gonna charge them additional for the value of the tree, then how do we determine the value? Is that the,
Yeah, so that's the guide for plant appraisal, authored by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers, which I am not familiar with. But speaking with the city forester, it sounds like you can accumulate very, very large amounts of money. through
Oh, yeah.
that
Yeah.
valuation.
Yeah, if you have
Larger than the
you have a 36-inch tree or something like that, it could be like $40,000-$50,000.
And that's some of the numbers that we're throwing around.
And I think that provision is in there for the most egregious kinds of loss of trees, you know, where it may be a particularly large tree or a particularly valued tree that was taken out in a very egregious manner. I think is the reason why the UFB wanted to see that kind of additional option in B or number two, to be able to not only add the base fine, but go beyond that. Jacob and I were talking that, probably the vast majority of them would just be subject to the base fine, because, most of them,
I think you
many of them would not fall into that category.
might even want to step up, like if they did one tree, it's $300, but what if they go to a second and a third?
So I was just going to address that. It looks like in the end of F1, it says each wrongfully killed or removed significant tree constitutes a separate violation subject to a separate fine.
So I apologize for not bringing the document today, but I just want to clarify, we're talking about when a developer is clearing land, this is not like a person owning a piece of, just a.
Yeah, so
regular
this
lot.
would be
Yeah.
only when a property is being developed in the actual, that stage of the development.
And it sounds like at that time, significant trees are marked very clearly. And so it has to be a known act to go and take that tree's life.
Right, yeah, the planners are gonna go over, this is
Yeah.
gonna be one of the topics that's covered and the discussion about what trees are staying and
Yep.
not are gonna be made then, yeah.
Thank you.
So how does the code address a property owner that has an existing structure that cuts down a significant tree? And
Yeah, so that's the private property significant tree that I referenced we did earlier this year. We changed that fine. It was also a $500 fine. It's a different process. They can get a permit, and we have criteria for its removal. But if they do it without the permit, it's the $500 to the $2,000 fine.
Council, in directing staff to kind of process this amendment, specifically made a distinction between your private your average homeowner removing a tree versus, like you say, the calculation that might go on in a development where if I remove this for $500, I'm going to get much more value out of more buildable area. And so they direct us to draw a distinction between the two in terms of the fines.
Yeah, that makes sense because they've already been through the process. We've identified all the trees. We've talked about them. I mean,
Should be aware.
yeah, like it's very.
So if somebody's remodeling their house and they bring a contractor in and he cuts down a tree to do it, is it still a private fine then, or is it the development? Would it be the development fine?
If you're talking a lot that's already developed and they're doing something later,
Yeah,
yeah, so that would fall under the private
Private.
property.
okay.
Because it's all private property. It'd fall into the non-developing property.
Right.
Okay.
We encourage developers, we know that there's changes that occurred during development and sometimes, and you've probably seen it or been aware of it, that developers, sometimes they strive to say they're going to preserve more trees than are probably feasible. They're trying to give the tree the benefit of the doubt. So there are instances where they get into construction, they find out they just can't save the tree, even though they said they were going to. We can work with developers there. As long as they come to us, there's a good supporting reason for doing so, they can make changes to their tree plan. So, we'll work with folks and oftentimes they do come forward, but this is for those times where they don't and just, we don't have that opportunity for that conversation.
An additional point of clarification. If I was cutting down that big old ponderosa in the back of my place so I could build an EDU, is that still private or is that contract?
That's private. That's what
Still private, yeah. Where you were adding on to the building, I was adding a new building. I was just taking what you had, just expanding a little bit,
Okay.
making sure.
Unless that was like something you said you were going to save in your building permit. That I believe would be more subject to the development code versus just somebody wanting to clear, they want more sunlight in their backyard or something like that. Or so if it's associated with a building permit in a project, then I believe it would be more subject to the development code.
Well, that's different than what we what I just said then.
Well, as opposed to somebody just cutting a tree that wasn't associated, didn't have a building permit. They just wanted to take out a tree like for a different purpose.
Okay,
What was your?
Mike,
example?
because I said, what if you wanted to add on to your house and you brought in a contractor?
Okay, you
and-
wanted to add onto your house, but if you.
That would be the same thing as
Yeah.
adding an ADU then.
Like if you, yeah, especially if you were gonna save that tree as part of your building permit. So that's,
Is there a site visit? Like a building permit for an addition?
what do you,
But I mean, would somebody from the city go to the site and go? And look, like, say, I'm gonna do a 12 by 20 addition on the side of my house here, and that tree is 13 feet away, and we know it's gonna die. And you're killing it. I mean, does somebody from the city go there and do a site visit for the permit?
well, it's under construction or before?
No, before, I mean, before they give them the permit.
We typically just use the building permit plans.
Yeah, so they wouldn't even know.
Well, we would know if they,
Elected to put that tree.
Right,
Yeah,
right.
if they say they were gonna retain a tree and then we go to do an inspection at final inspection and it's not there, then we would be like, hey, where's the tree?
Yeah.
You said you were gonna save.
But if you don't
But if you
put
don't
it
know
on the
about it in the first
plan,
place.
yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Well,
Yeah, there's a flaw there somehow.
I mean, we would know if there was, I mean, we generally know where the trees are in relation, you know, true, yeah, somebody could just not put a tree on the plan and maybe, you know, we miss it, I guess, but that's not been our experience. People usually identify them.
Or I catch it on dials, through aerial maps and
Yeah,
I check their work,
yeah,
call them out when.
Just a virtual site visit.
yeah. Yeah,
That's true.
I mean, dial's okay, but I mean, Street View works okay, but dial's a little tougher to see pictures that see trees on. I mean, you can tell it's there, but
Can't tell the diameter very well
yeah, you could,
because you're looking down.
yeah. A little tricky,
They're required to show all the significant trees on their plan, but
yeah.
you're right, I mean, there could be. But it sounds like Emmy, who reviews the vast majority of the building permits, does that check, so.
How is option one different from the original language? It looks to me like or is it just, is option one specifying per tree and the original language did not? Is that kind of the change there?
So it's the current existing language isn't shown, just the new language is shown. I should have probably had the strike through of what would have been leaving.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the current language is just the straight 500 to 500 penalty.
Oh, okay.
Does this include trees that are deemed sick or dead, snags?
What are we talking development or is it, we're still on development?
I would say more on the private.
Okay, well, if it's a private trees and you're a homeowner or a piece of property and you have a tree that you think is dying, you can apply to get that tree removed through the permit process. And as long as it's, they have to submit information from an arbor about the health of that tree. And then if it's clearly dying, we'll authorize the removal. And it's gonna be the same idea for a development. We're not gonna try to save a tree that's dying. That would,
I'm thinking back to when I've hired tree guys to come out and they're like, yep, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure no permit was
Yeah.
obtained prior to the work being done. And I, as the ignorant homeowner, was not aware that a permit was necessary. Probably not the only property owner out there that
No.
experiences that. Part of this would need to be education, not only of the public, but of contractors.
I also want to add, so that provision in the code about exemptions, trees that are dead, dying, hazardous, disease, whatnot, those can be evaluated and reduce the amount of replacement trees that could be required. So, we try to trees, but if some of those trees are dead, diseased, hazardous, they're not even significant anymore. They're eligible for removal. Therefore, it is fewer trees that need to be replaced. And that kind of goes out of the scope of what's being changed here. But through a building permit process, that can also be evaluated if it's during development. So there's kind of that nuance there, where sometimes exempt trees are also incorporated in, during development review.
I like the DBH method myself.
Yeah.
Just the DBH, not the supplemental fine, is that what you?
Well, it's supplemental if it's really obvious that they're flaunting and they're making just a financial decision. Cause even $6,000, if they're able to add $100,000 in structure, they might consider that. But if you have the other as a threat, then they might not do that if it's gonna be $40,000 or $50,000.
I kind of like it too. Yeah, from the development side, I think because you've gone through so much paperwork and everybody's done so much work to get to that point. You know,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you just come down and talk about it?
And once that tree's gone, it's gone. It takes a long time to grow another one.
A lifetime.
Any other thoughts, comments on direction that you guys want to provide? City council is also the other group body that we need to confer with. So they'll have, could have additional opinions, and we don't always, since the UFB is typically, the UFB being the Urban Forestry Board is typically only concerned with public trees and the removal of public trees, but we've kind of got into the practice when we amend the code that relates to trees, since they are kind of, experts on this, to get their opinion on it. So that's why we did that, even though they wouldn't be regulating any of these trees themselves.
I agree with Daryl and Art with respect to the changes in the language. I just want to make sure that my initial instinct was for the developer, I think this, you gotta do this. For the private citizen that owns this property or the property, there's a little bit of overreach, but, that's just me.
Is it possible to add in some kind of affirmative defense, like if you can prove that the tree was dying before you cut it down, maybe that would ameliorate the fine? I don't know.
Well, if you come in and say you have a tree that's dying and you discuss it, you can get a permit to.
Right, but I was just thinking Jeff's example of an arborist says it's got to go. I don't know. It needs, Joe Blow, Jane Blow doesn't know that
Right.
a permit's needed. They just want to keep it from falling on their house. And so they're like, yeah, do it. Maybe.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, not every tree contractor is a certified arborist either.
Right.
Most aren't.
Yeah.
But we're talking about two different things. One, we're not even dealing with the private tonight, really, unless we're gonna change that at the same time. I think this is just concerning the developer, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Oh, never mind then.
Well, just to let you know. Commissioner Dickman, maybe it's me. We do have a provision for Joe homeowner that if they do have if it's an emergency and they don't want to have to come and ask this, they can do so, but they could document that afterwards.
Okay.
I think that's how it's written to I believe something to that effect, that don't wait to have the city say, okay, if it's an impending, seriously impending danger.
Okay.
But they also, if there was fines levied, there's appeal processes too. In addition to that, even prior to an appeal process, if a homeowner came to me with that information, it's something that it's going to be considered.
Sure.
So it's not, they're not going to be just stuck with no option to get out, and it's not a hard line that we have to issue a citation. Again, if there's reasonable, things out there, then we can go with that too.
Cool.
Just out of curiosity, what was the fine that was levied on the folks that cut those trees down in the right of way on Pine Street? That made so much press?
I think that predated us.
Yeah, it was actual right of way. I wasn't here for that one.
Yeah, they started out at like 24,000 or something like that, and I think they went down considerably after that, 5,000 maybe, I want to say.
I think the original number should have been based off of the same wording. Because this wording is used elsewhere in our code. But I'm
It
not
is
100%.
for public trees, yeah, yeah.
I thought it was the same.
Yeah.
You need to lose all the equity in your house, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's really bad.
Yeah, it just says, just for reference, says for private trees, it says trees that present immediate threat to safety and welfare, and properly. So there, you don't need a tree removal permit, trees that present immediate threat. And properly provided advance notice of the proposed removal is provided to the city to the greatest extent practical. Notice after the fact must be provided if advance notice is not practical.
Okay.
So leave a message on your voicemail.
Yeah, right.
Gotcha.
With a movie and
With a
photograph.
movie.
Should you call on a Sunday?
Yeah.
You
Sorry,
can
my
usually
camera
find
wasn't
somebody.
working.
I have to do stuff all the time. I can normally find somebody from the city on the weekend.
Well, we all know where Paul lives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. He's hunkered down, hiding in the closet.
All right.
What's
Is
this
that-
process? Does it have to come through formally? The update, like these updates, they have to come through and be voted on, or what's the process for the?
Just let it
changes?
come through.
Okay,
Correct. Yeah.
I thought so. I was just,
It'll come through like any other code amendment.
So we're just working, discussing it at this point, right? No,
Correct.
we're not taking any vote or.
Yeah, we're going to get council's feedback, then we'll come back through the planning commission.
Great.
Thank you.
Perfect, thank you. I think we talked.
Yeah, we haven't
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all right, man.
We've had an urban salvage sawmill business in the Portland area for a long time. That's why I'm pretty familiar with the permits, the trees, the TBH, the whole.
It's a big deal around there, isn't it? With tree.
Oh, yeah. But it's not 8 inches, I can tell you that.
That wouldn't cut it over there, would it?
No, I mean, 8 inches is like a year's growth or something.
It's true.
Yeah, the growth rings are that far apart.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah, especially if it's a sequoia.
yeah.
Those things are.
I would just like to point out, it was really helpful having the minutes from
Mhm.
the forestry board.
Good. Yeah.
Good context.
Good. Even though they're a little challenging to read. It was like reading a book. But save paper though, with, I don't know, by not having them like kind of,
oh, yeah.
so. We'll thank Jackson, in Public Works for that. Carol, you don't have to do it that way.
Yeah, let's go ahead and move on.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, Matt's up next.
All right, thank you. Matthew Martin, City of Sisters Community Development Department. Here for an update on wildfire resiliency and efforts that have been undertaken statewide as well as here locally to implement mitigation measures to make the City of Sisters and the broader community more resilient to the potential and then the after effects of any wildfire. So today is not necessarily an effort or an interest in getting feedback on particular code provisions like you already discussed, but rather an update on some of the statewide efforts and local efforts again, and then kind of looking at this as being the kickoff of the formal review process on on defensible space standards that we're going to be, spoiler alert, looking to adopt some local standards here in City of Sisters. But since we last met earlier this year, there's been additional action and updates on the implementation of Senate Bill 762 and Senate Bills 80. So I wanted to provide those updates if you haven't been tracking those, and talk about the council's direction to date. And again, just to get us kind of reoriented for action here in the coming months. How we got started with this is community-wide, but in particular, City Council's goal of updating our defensible space and building hardening standards here in the City of Sisters to help mitigate those risks and impacts of wildfire, as we know are kind of generally ever present these days in Sisters Country and City of Sisters more specifically. So what I wanted to cover today is kind of an update on the implementation of the Senate Bill 762 and 80. And an offshoot of that is the new draft statewide wildfire hazard maps. And then the forthcoming implementation of building hardening code standards statewide, as well as opportunities and requirements for defensible space standards. So happy to entertain any questions throughout, and I have a soft 30 minutes to work with, so we'll work our way through some of these details. So again, in 2021 and then followed up in 2023, state legislature adopted legislation to address the resiliency and opportunities for mitigating the impacts of wildfire. Included in that legislation were required action and standards to address those provisions, including Department of Forestry in concert with the Oregon State University to develop and adopt the statewide wildfire, what was originally risk map, now hazard map. And then also Oregon State Fire Marshal was directed to prepare and develop and adopt defensible space standards statewide. And then similarly, the State Building Codes Division was directed to update the Oregon Residential Specialty Code, in particular R327, as it applies to residential construction and the building hardening of those structures moving forward. So I want to start with that update to the wildfire hazard map. Just noting that originally under 762, the Department of Forestry was directed to prepare wildfire risk map that included 5 designations of risk categories. That was issued in early summer of 2023, and almost immediately upon its issuance of those draft maps, there was a boisterous concern and comment. I was going to say backlash, and perhaps it was, to the mapping data and the results of those maps and potential implications of what that mapping could include. And so not long after it being issued, the Department of Forestry rescinded the issuance of that map and identified that, yeah, there was some more work to be done in refining the evaluation, the analysis process, and since then worked on improving those that study and analysis, but also through Senate Bill 80, the map was reframed instead of as risk categories, which means the risk of your property loss or risk to you. The risk categories were changed to hazard categories and reduced from 5 to 3. Low, moderate, and high. And this is just to identify that there's a potential hazard for wildfire in your area, but not the risk to property loss. So it's a distinction on just identifying what where you live and what the hazard may be of wildfire in that area. So the analysis was framed and based on the standards that include weather, climate, topography, and vegetation. And noting I'm not a wildfire scientist. I don't work for OSU, so I don't have the details of the methodology there. So I apologize for that, but trust those processes and then the expertise that is included at Department of Forestry, Oregon State University, and others that have been participated in the process. That also included consulting counties throughout the state, and in particular, direct participation by Deschutes County Community Development Department and the Deschutes County Forester, Kevin Moriarty, that provided detailed comments throughout the review process and the development process of the mapping information. So using the weather, climate, topography, and vegetation really begins to identify what the potential burn probability is. That means what's the chance of a wildfire happening in your area, and then what that fire intensity, what that flame length is, what the breadth or the intensity of the wildfire could be. So those two factors combine to identify what that wildfire hazard is. And the state has been clear to identify that the purpose of the map is to educate Oregon residents and property owners of the potential risks or hazards of wildfire where they live, and to assist in prioritizing funding and resources for areas that that may be vulnerable and need additional attention and resources, and mitigation measures such as vegetation clearing, other improvements within those areas. And then to identify where home hardening codes and defensible space standards will apply. We'll get to that a little bit more in detail, because that's going to be specific and detailed in how it plays out here in City of Sisters. So if you haven't had a chance to visit Oregon Explorer and the specific wildfire hazard map, this is what it looks like. I do want to, I'm going to step out of my presentation real quick and give you a kind of a look at the map itself, and kind of walk our way through town. So the three hazard categories identified in what I'll call teal is the low designation, whereas the purple or lavender identifies a moderate hazard area, and the orange identifies high hazard areas. So as you can see, there's a variety of categories and disparity from lot to lot in some cases, and so potentially the accuracy of that could be called into question as to how can one lot next door under the same conditions have a different hazard category, or perhaps what is most prominent is here in western part of the town, where you do have a patchwork and some kind of what we'll call islands or donut holes within the moderate categories, where you have high and then even a low risk right next door on an individual lot. So some of those anomalies and discrepancies were identified by the experts, particularly Deschutes County, and identified as a potential concern with the actual accuracy of the mapping itself. But this is what's been presented for current comment. Also want to note that the shaded but dark line represents the city limits, but this exterior, more not linear, but amorphous line identifies the wildland urban interface. And that's an important category and distinction, because as we look at the applicability of those building hardening and defensible space standards as directed by the state legislature, apply to those areas that are in the wildland urban interface, which as you can see is the entirety of City of Sisters, and high hazard areas. So under the state legislation, those building hardening defensible space standards would only be applicable to these areas in orange.
Not all the surrounding areas.
I'm just speaking to the City of Sisters itself. So if we zoom out just to see where we're looking. So this area would also be subject to the building hardening and defensible space standards. So if we zoom out more broadly you can see kind of where, so again, the darker rings are those wildland urban interfaces where human development and structures either interface or commingle with the wildlands.
Okay, so like, Tollgate and some of the others are included in the,
They're in the wildland urban interface, but not the high hazard area because they're shown in the purple.
So I'm not sure if
Were
I'm
those
getting
some of the
it.
changes they got? Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I insist.
Um, so is in general, any kind of, hardening requirements would be maybe at the state level would be based on the quote, color of your lot. But then the city could put in additional, like layers that are higher standards than the state.
We'll speak to that in a little bit
Okay,
more detail.
okay.
So we have two different categories, the building code standards, the
Yep.
building hardening, and then the defensible space standards.
Okay.
And there's two different tracks for,
Okay, thank you.
for applicability of that.
Daryl, did you have?
hopefully there's more
I'm
work
good.
being
I-
done.
Okay.
I said, hopefully there's more work being done because some of it doesn't make any sense.
Some of the, well, yeah, was it like, were some of these things, like those subdivisions that are outside the city limits, were they, was that part of the retraction in 2023? When they like, hold on, we can't do that because the insurance companies are freaking out.
Yeah, and so one distinction
Kinda
is.
getting off track a little bit.
Yeah, so I haven't done that comparison as part of tonight's presentation on what the classifications were before versus now.
Yeah,
I know that it's generally consistent with what that mapping was and kind of where you saw moderate distinctions versus high, different categories, but it's generally consistent, but I don't have that side by side comparison.
I mean, my point being like, your neighbor has to protect his property. So you can save yours too, kind of. I mean, we all, you can't, like, you can't do a whole bunch of stuff here and have your neighbor just have sage brush installed and ladder fuel and trees everywhere.
Right.
So that's my point.
Yeah, and to hit on a couple of points, specifically insurance implications. The state has also adopted legislation that's specifically states that this mapping data cannot be used for assessment of your homeowner's insurance.
Oh, and
Um,
how are they gonna keep?
Well, and if you, so there's, if you anecdotally, and I've heard the conversations with insurance companies that their assessment and their risk assessment tools are far more sophisticated than what we have here under this mapping. But the fact of the matter is they're making their adjustments, assessments based on different information.
I know that Tollgate and Crossroads has gone through a process for Firewise, for that whole defensible space and hardening type stuff. So they can get their properties are Firewise certified. So that probably helps make it perfect.
And what I understand too is that the efforts to address vegetation management within the forested properties, the Forest Service or federally owned lands, has had some impact on this moderate designation because the efforts have been put in place to mitigate the wildfire impacts there versus the grasslands and privately owned properties to the east that maybe haven't gone through those dedicated and concerted efforts to address wildfire. And publicly owned versus privately owned. But I also want to note that, what we're talking about is state mandated standards, whereas the value and the importance of wildfire mitigation by maintaining your vegetation and defensible spaces, or maybe putting that extra effort or cost into your structures that you're developing to as an opportunity to on your own to make your property more resilient in the event of fire. So that's that's where they emphasize the opportunities, importance of education. So where we're looking at what our rules are, there's opportunities to go above and beyond. certainly come back to the map. Well, I don't want to leave it too quickly. Any other observations or questions, comments?
Well, I just don't understand why they have lots next to each other that one's
Yeah.
hazard and one's not.
And certainly you're not alone in that question that was raised not only by Kevin Moriarty, county commissioners, city councilors at our prayer workshop discussing the same thing. So perhaps there's more opportunity to refine the map, and we can touch on that here in a minute.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Matt. A lot of this data is based on 2022 building data. So some of those lots that are vacant lots and they're just kind of, could be just grass or not irrigated or not built on, I think are some of the reasons why you see some of these as like, look at Saddlestone, for instance. A good portion of that looks like it's orange, but
Well, I know we,
has since been developed. I think once it gets developed, it goes into a lower risk category. And
we saw the map for our development, and houses right next to each other have different ratings.
Yeah.
And
So-
they're on a meadow and there's a lake and it's all landscaped. It's like,
And to Scott's point, yeah, point in time analysis. And will need to be a process of updating the maps. It wouldn't be necessarily in real time as properties develop, but that'd be an ongoing kind of need as conditions change, right? As these requirements are implemented. Well, if we get defensible space and building hardening, then perhaps that hazard may be reduced over time. A work in progress, perhaps. And so on that note, over the summer, this draft map was issued in July, and there was a comment period that ended middle of August. We met with city council during that comment period, and they did direct staff to submit comments based on their concern of the accuracy of the maps that we discussed here briefly, and the potential limitations of applying building code standards here within the city limits. We'll touch on that a little bit more detail as we get to that specific level of standards and applicability. So comment period's closed. The state's evaluating those comments and refining the map a bit further with the intent of issuing a final draft on October 1st. And that will kick off an appeals process that was provided to property owners. So if you don't agree with the designation of your property, you do have an opportunity to have that changed or at least evaluated on your individual lot opportunity. So that's a built-in aspect of the adoption process. That's a 60-day window that's going to run from October 1st. At least that's when the appeals can be filed. And with the intent of having the map final by the beginning of December, except for those outstanding appeals that need to be finalized.
And they're expecting appeals, it sounds like.
Yeah, so
At least minor appeals associated with certain properties.
yeah, absolutely. Or neighborhoods could
Yeah.
collectively come in together. Yeah, so as part of Senate Bill 80 was recognition that this mapping, it's a high level mapping exercise. And so there could be site specific conditions that can't be evaluated or identified on that high level. So recognition of that. Questions about the map at this point? Okay, moving to building hardening. We covered this in relative detail at the beginning of the year, so it wasn't my intent to talk about it, what it is in any kind of detail. But this is to implement standards for your property and your structures that make it more resilient and to wildfire or any fire for that matter, but rather that it's fire resistant or fireproof in some conditions. That's siding, roofing materials that have a particular rating, vents that have a mesh that is a smaller grade or gauge that doesn't allow embers to drift through that mesh. double pane windows or above and beyond, fire resistant decking and fencing materials in proximity to your
Taking all
structures.
the bushes away from your house and moving them out.
So that's it. I see it as a combination, both building hardening is maintaining that vegetation around it, but also maintaining the vegetation or pine needles or others that have fallen on or in your gutters or on your roof that that could make it more vulnerable to the impacts of wildfire. So it's a combination. So one, we're talking about building code standards, the other are development standards. One in particular that's really grown in prominence is wood fencing attached to structures as one example. As I hear fire officials, they talk about that serving as a wick that can, if the fire catches a portion of your fencing on fire, it could run straight to your structure and then cause conditions to be worse. So is that an opportunity to require metal fencing or no fencing in close proximity to your structure? So under the legislation, Building Code Division was directed at updating the residential specialty code. That's identified as section R327 to apply to new residential development and significant home improvements in high wildfire hazard areas that are also in the wildland urban interface. So emphasizing that you need to fall within both of those categories for this state code to apply to your property. So when building permit comes in, the building division will be consulting the risk map, keep saying risk, the hazard map, to determine what that classification is. Within that code update, there was a period of time that the local jurisdictions could adopt these building code standards before they go into effect, which is upon adoption of the hazard map. So in that intervening time period, you could have these higher standards in place more expeditiously. Earlier, the city council directed staff to pursue that, but in the intervening time period, we also learned that any adoption of this local adoption of R327 would be superseded by with the adoption of the statewide map. Meaning if you were to adopt a map that applied to citywide, that if the map as shown has different classifications, then that map would apply and supersede that local map. So any protective measures that you applied during that time period citywide may not be applicable or implementable or enforceable in other areas of town once the map's adopted.
So the city is not, once the map is adopted, the city is not able to have a standard set of code across the city. Is that what I'm hearing?
For this building code. Yeah, so statewide building code is just that, statewide and intentionally prescriptive. So it's predictable and can be applied statewide.
But a green lot versus a purple lot could have different standards?
Well, not in this case. That's
Okay.
because those are low and moderate. So
Oh, okay.
so
Right, okay,
let's say purple and orange.
okay.
The orange would be subject to these higher building code standards, whereas the purple would not be.
But why couldn't we have higher standards than the state map? You know, citywide?
Because of how the state building code is written, it's with land use codes and development codes, you have a minimum standard at the state level, but local jurisdictions can go higher.
That's what I'm saying.
How the building code is written, however, it's the opposite. The state standards apply the top tier. You can't go less restrictive than what those standards.
Well, I didn't
Or,
want to go less.
excuse me, you can't deviate from what the standards within the state building code. It's a different construct than we have with land use codes. Which became kind of a concern for the city council, who originally directed us to adopt that here citywide. Because there's an interest in predictability and equity within the city limits and how that's applied. However, city council is dedicated to adopting those standards citywide, even during an intervening time period, because seeing that any additional protections that could be applied should be applied during this intervening time period. So we intend on, not long after this, kicking off that process with the city council, noting that that's going to be a change to the city's municipal code versus the development code. I highlight that because Planning Commission has a review authority and role with changes to the development code, but not necessarily municipal code. Certainly consult you and update you on those processes, but there wouldn't be the typical public hearing and recommendation that you'd have with text amendments to the development code. But thank you. In comments I've heard highlighted that concern of the opportunity to apply a higher standard within the city of Sisters to provide a higher protection standard. The comments that the city council provided to the in response to the maps reflected that as well, saying that you're hamstringing, you're limiting opportunities to further protect our community. And similar comments were shared by City of Ashland as they've. So Ashland and Medford are communities that have both adopted R327 already. And so what's happening is that they provided additional protections and expectations of their community, whereas the state is adopting a standard that reels that in, or retracts the protections, lowers the level of protection. So I suspect there's going to be more to come on that, either through the mapping or a separate legislation to provide an opportunity for a local amendment relative to that. Okay, defensible space. Again, this is the management of vegetation in proximity to structures where you have low lying and well separated vegetation in close proximity to structures, and kind of graduated requirements of tree separation, tree limbing, and management of those ladder fuels to reduce the impact as fires as they come in close proximity to your structures, to help provide a better chance for those structures and property to survive a wildfire. So under the legislation, the State Fire Marshal's Office was directed to update and provide draft defensible space standards that again would apply only to high wildfire hazard areas in the wildland urban interface. But want to note that this is a development code level standard, whereas different than the building code standards, we have an opportunity to go above and beyond what the State Fire Marshal's Office has drafted as those defensible space standards. So City Council is dedicated to going in that direction and providing standards that are far more robust, that would apply here within the city limits citywide, and look at a package of code standards that would apply initially to the new development, but there may be opportunities to also look at within our municipal code, look at applying some standards to nuisance vegetation, et cetera, because it's one thing to develop defensible space initially while vegetation grows, and we need that ongoing maintenance of that vegetation to ensure that the defensible space has its effect as intended. So we are looking to not only those draft rules or standards developed by the State Fire Marshal's Office, but other best practices within the state. Highlighted previously, this City of Ashland and their standards. I think they're held as kind of the gold standard for defensible space requirements here in the state of Oregon. And they go beyond just those management of ladder fuels and tree spacing, et cetera, but also look at types of vegetation that are included in landscaping, and where it's located, building practices, as I touched on, fencing, which may not be part of the building code, but rather other development standard, as looking at ways to look at it as a kind of a comprehensive package of standards. So with defensible space, with the building hardening, looking at opportunities to make your individual properties more resilient, but collectively the community as a whole. So this is coming your way in relative short order, hoping to get back to you in the coming month or months to really start to drill down on what those standards should be for our unique conditions that we have here in Sisters with given our climate, topography, our weather and vegetation. Any questions about that or any other aspects of what we talked about? Again, this serving as an update of those new information that's happened since we last met, that being the issuance of the updated draft maps and the implications or limitations of the adoption of the R327 standards.
Learn something new every time. Hmm?
Good. I get at least something.
No.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I wanted to share something with everybody. Prior to this meeting, I actually met with my insurance agent to just go through and do an insurance review. And he told me that the average price of a new policy, a new homeowner's policy in Sisters is now $10,000 to $12,000 a year.
Ooh,
Oh, man.
$1,000.
which insurance company is that?
Farmers. So that's, you want to talk about not affordable housing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he says it's just, it's not sustainable.
So what, any options or ideas or?
If you wanna own a home in Sisters and you've got a mortgage, that's what you're paying.
That's right, mortgage. I was gonna say,
Yeah.
don't have insurance. but
Yeah.
mortgage.
Yeah.
I don't know people that don't have a homeowner's insurance.
Geez.
Probably gonna be more.
They don't have mortgage, no,
Yeah, but that's you're hanging way
Yeah.
out there,
yeah.
Anyway, thought I'd share.
especially around here.
Well, recognizing that that's a broader issue, not only Sisters Country, Oregon and the West and other regions, you know, with the other natural hazards. Looking at what can we do here locally and how can it be kind of reframed? And looking at programs like the Firewise communities that get that designation and have the programs in place to maintain that vegetation, improve education within those communities, that perhaps the insurance companies can kind of evaluate it based on that level of protection on a
Yeah, we all just
community wide.
Need to live in concrete bunkers and.
Well, it was really interesting what he said with respect to what's really happening and, you know, the insurance companies have determined that this is a high risk, therefore they can charge a higher premium. But the reality is this is there's very few insurance claims that get issued here in
Yeah.
Sisters. He says in his 18 years of doing it, they've had 4 claims for fires. So it's actually a very safe market for insurance companies because of.
But the value of the houses are so high, they have to.
But like I just got a renewal and it's like 20% of what you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got an existing policy, keep it.
Yeah,
I think that's what I took away from the.
Okay.
meeting.
it's
Um,
the new policies.
He also said that the way that the insurance industry is structured, at least with respect to farmers, was farmers has a cap of $2 million replacement value on any residence, single-family dwelling. And then there is I don't know if it's a reinsurance or if it's a supplemental insurance, but it's more of a wholesale insurance. It has an acronym of CHUB. I don't know what it stands for. And then when that $2 million limit is met, then that kicks in and covers the rest. However, that supplemental insurance company has now moved out of Central Oregon due to risk factors. And so
Huh.
now the cap for replacement value is $2 million, which that's not as much money as it used to be.
No.
When it comes to rebuilding a house.
Sounds like we're primed for a wildfire. I mean, that's what they're thinking.
With potential devastating
Yeah,
effects.
yeah.
You know, just last week, we had a
was it, they call it non-recreational camper, caught fire on Highway 20 just outside of town.
Right next to us.
I witnessed
But
it.
it only burnt a couple trees and a little bit of grass, and part of the forest management stuff that the Forest Service has been doing to help
Yeah.
down, because there's areas if that would have happened, it could have got.
But
really
look
ugly.
outside of Bend, the same thing happened, and 80 acres burnt
Right,
earlier this year, and it's,
right, but that wasn't mitigated forest through there.
no, but it was campers in the forest.
Right.
Yeah, that should be part of the risk assessment.
On that bleak note.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Go shoot the
Hi,
messenger.
Mike.
Yeah.
Keep your policy. right?
Yeah.
Cry in my car now.
Any additional from the commission or from staff?
Scott, can you turn on your mic?
You're laughing.
He's got something in his teeth, I think, a filling or something.
Yeah, next meeting, September 19th, we have a public hearing. That'll be a 5:30 meeting. So if you want to get that in your calendars, it's a modification to an approval that we're going to be presenting, or we'll be presenting to you.
What's the development?
Woodlands, 5:30.
I will not be here, I can tell you that now.
Okay.
Just had another grandbaby. We gotta fly back to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Aw,
Congratulations.
Good reason to skip.
I guess we'll let you off.
look
for
at that smile.
Yeah.
I guess we'll let you off for that. And then the October 3rd, looks like it's gonna be canceled, the meeting, due to us UGB steering committee meeting that night. And then October 17th will be an update on the UGB for planning commission. So if you want to plan out the next month or two, those are the meetings we're looking at. So anything else, Matt? You have anything? Amy, Carol?
If I could just call out a project that we wrapped up. So City of Sisters in partnership with Deschutes County gets grant funds from the State of Historic Preservation Office, SHPO. And for this last year's grant cycle, we worked on compiling a report that kind of took the building hardening and defensible space standards and kind of framed it through the lens of historic preservation. We have a handful of historically significant properties in town in our commercial district, and a lot of those building materials are highly flammable. But we also have our Western design theme, and the ordinance for the Western design theme was adopted over 50 years ago now, which means we have buildings that could be soon eligible for historic designation. In relation to that Western design theme being a significant event for the history of Sisters. And so this report kind of looks at what are those building materials, what makes them not compliant with fire resilient building hardening standards. And if those buildings were ever to be rehabilitated or maintained, whatever maintenance to occur, what building materials could be used that would kind of improve the fire resiliency so that we can continue to preserve those historic resources. So I can share that report out in an email. It's on the city website, but that's a project that we just finished last week.
So like buildings like Sister Saloon and things like that.
Yeah.
We kind of anticipate these as becoming like recommended guidelines, if you want to kind of solve both of those, address both of those issues of historic preservation and wildfire resilience. We don't think, given, kind of what the state building code allows, we might not be able to require those, but we could see these as like kind of best practices for downtown business owners if they want to accomplish both goals. So
It's so weird to hear you talk about 1970 as being historic building.
You're the dinosaur.
I am a dinosaur.
You gotta exclude the ones that were built in the 70s.
Yeah, no kidding.
Just for their design.
Great architecture,
It
right?
was a hard time back then. It must have been, huh?
yeah, I'd like to thank Amy for the hard work on that. That was
Yeah.
well done.
Yeah, thanks, Amy.
Yeah, I'll read that.
Anything else?
I have one other thing, you know, we're gonna be adding more people to, you know, to our group. You know, because some people are leaving, aging out or whatever, you know, if you have friends that.
Like a mule?
Wow.
Never thought I'd hear that one.
Yeah, okay.
You mean senility is
Yeah.
calling or
Yeah.
what?
But you know, we have people that you know that are capable and stuff, you should have them start maybe looking for when the application comes out. 'Cause that's gonna be what, November? Yeah, applications probably start that term. So we know what it's like here, so, you know, we have a good idea of who out there may be good.
Sure.
I think when somebody
idea.
leaves, they ought to bring two people in.
You don't get out.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's not the way it works.
Yeah. Yeah.
Remember, this is voluntary.
That's true.
Oh,
Right,
yeah.
oh, right.
Yeah, Commissioner.
Maybe we should start drafting people in and
Yeah.
Yeah.
description into the planning commission.
Yeah.
You don't get any flack for being on this.
It's like,
Yeah.
Community.
Just make a bad decision.
Yeah.
I think we should show the snack table. It's right, that's like a draw.
Thank you.
all right, everybody. Thank
All
you
right,
very much.
Thanks a lot.
Cool.
Good night. We're adjourned.